Varric was not supposed to be this far north. As AlphaKing of the Leaken territories, he had captains and scouts who handled patrols of the remote villages clinging to the edges of his frozen realm. But Varric had always believed a true protector needed to walk his borders with his own feet, hear his people's struggles without courtiers filtering the cold truths that might displease him. So he had left the obsidian citadel before the winter dawn, accompanied only by Gareth, his beta in wolf form, and traveled the white wilderness that stretched beneath his crown. He had inspected the trading posts, the lumber camps, the settlements where families huddled around fires and spoke his name with respect. And now, as the pale afternoon light began to fail, he found himself in the smallest village, where cottages sagged under snow's weight and smoke rose thin from chimneys that struggled to warm rooms packed with too many souls and too little hope. It was here, where the path split between two rows of leaning houses, that he saw the child. She was tiny, perhaps 7 years old, with hair the color of winter wheat escaping from beneath a gray wool coat that had been patched too many times. She stood alone in the center of the path, and in her small hands she held a pair of worn brown shoes, their leather cracked from use and cold. The girl was not huddled for warmth or calling for help, which is what arrested Varric's attention first. She simply stood there, barefoot in the snow, holding the shoes out like an offering, her bare toes already turning red against the white drifts. Varric found himself stopping, the wolf beside him growling low in confusion. The child looked up at him with eyes far too solemn for such a young face, eyes that had known loss and fear, but still burned with desperate purpose. "Please buy my shoes, sir," she said, her voice trembling but clear. She lifted them higher, her arms shaking. "Mummy is dying. She needs medicine. They're good shoes. They're all I have." For a moment, Varric could only stare. In 3 centuries of life, he had seen battlefields soaked in blood, had witnessed plagues that emptied entire towns, had stood over the graves of warriors who had sworn to follow him into death itself. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of this small human child standing barefoot in the ice, offering her only protection against the killing cold because she loved her mother more than she feared freezing. "How long have you been standing here?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Since morning, sir." Her teeth chattered between the words. "But nobody has coin for shoes today. Please, sir. Mummy's fever is very bad. The healer said she needs medicine from the city, but it costs silver, and we only have—" She stopped, looking down at the shoes in her hands. "We only have these." Varric knelt in the snow before her, bringing himself down to her level. This close, he could see the blue tinge creeping into her lips, the way her entire body trembled beneath that inadequate coat. Her feet were no longer red, they had gone pale and waxy, the flesh beginning to surrender to the frost. She was dying. Standing here trying to save her mother, this child was slowly dying, and she either didn't know or didn't care. Behind him, Gareth whined, a sound of distress that no ordinary wolf would make. The beta could sense what Varric felt, the rage and grief twisting in his chest like a knife. This was his territory. These were his people. And he had not known they suffered like this. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Ilara, sir." "Ilara." He reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a small bag, heavy with gold coins. More gold than this child had likely ever seen in her short life. More than enough for medicine, for food, for fuel to last the winter. He pressed it into her hands, then carefully took the worn shoes from her. "I'll buy your shoes, Ilara. And I'm paying what they're truly worth." Her eyes went wide as she felt the weight of the gold, and for the first time, tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mummy will." "Hush now." Varric swept the heavy fur cloak from his shoulders, the one lined with wolf pelts and embroidered with silver thread, worth more than every cottage in this village combined, and wrapped it around the shivering child. She disappeared into it, so small that only her face showed above the collar. He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest, and felt the terrible cold radiating from her small body even through his leather armor. "Gareth," he commanded, and the massive timber wolf moved immediately to his side. "Take us to her home. Now." The wolf's golden eyes met his, understanding passing between Alpha and Beta without words. Gareth's nose dropped to the snow, finding the child's scent trail, and began to pad toward the edge of the village. Varric followed, holding Ilara close, feeling her gradually stop shaking as his body heat seeped through the furs into her frozen limbs. "You're safe now," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you. I promise you that." He did not yet know that inside the drafty cottage they were approaching, he would find not just a dying woman in need of medicine, but the other half of his soul, the mate his wolf had been howling for across 3 lonely centuries. He knew only that he would move heaven and earth to keep the promise he had just made to a barefoot child in the snow. The cottage stood at the village's edge, half buried in snow drifts that had piled against its sagging walls. Gareth led them directly to the crooked door, and Alara squirmed in Varric's arms, reaching for the latch with small hands still clutching the bag of gold. "Mummy's inside," she whispered. "She's been sleeping for 2 days." Varric's blood went cold at those words, but he said nothing. He pushed the door open and stepped into darkness broken only by the dim grey light filtering through gaps in the walls. The cold inside was somehow worse than outside, a damp, penetrating cold that spoke of no fire, no warmth, no life sustained here for too long. His leaken eyes adjusted instantly. The cottage was a single room, barely large enough for the broken furniture within it. A table with one leg propped on stacked stones. 2 chairs, one missing its back. A shelf that held 3 wooden bowls and a cracked cup. No food. No fuel for the dead hearth. Nothing of value except the worn blanket covering the still form on the narrow cot against the far wall. This was poverty he had only heard described in reports, sanitized by officials who called it hardship and modest circumstances. This was starvation. This was death coming slowly while the king lived in a fortress of obsidian and gold, warmed by fires that burned in every room, fed by kitchens that could provision an army. Shame burned in Varric's throat, bitter as poison. He set Alara down gently and crossed to the cot in 3 strides. The woman lying there was still, so terribly still that for one horrified moment he thought they had arrived too late. She was thin beneath the blanket, her face pale as the snow outside, her dark hair matted with fever sweat. Her lips were cracked and bloodless. Varric reached out, his hand trembling. Something that had not happened since his first battle centuries ago, and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. The bond slammed into him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. His inner wolf, the beast that had slept quiet and controlled for 300 years, surged forward with a roar that echoed only in his mind. "Mate! Mate! Mate!" The word thundered through every fiber of his being, ancient and undeniable, a truth written into his very bones. She was dying. His mate, his fated one, the other half of his soul, was dying in this frozen hovel while he had lived in ignorant comfort. "No," Varric growled, and his voice carried the alpha command that could compel wolves to their knees. "You will not die. Do you hear me? You will not die." The bond burned through Varric's veins like wildfire, transforming everything he thought he knew about himself. 3 centuries of careful control shattered in an instant. His wolf clawed at the edges of his humanity, desperate to shift, to protect, to claim what was his. But shifting now would terrify the child watching him with wide, hopeful eyes, and his mate, God's his mate, needed a healer, not a beast. He forced himself to breathe, to think past the primal instinct screaming through his blood. Elena's pulse fluttered weakly beneath his fingers, irregular and faint. Winter's fever. He recognized it now, the grayish tint to her skin, the way her body had stopped shivering because it had no warmth left to preserve. She had hours at best, perhaps less. Varric threw back his head and howled. The sound tore from his throat, inhuman and commanding, carrying across the frozen landscape with the power of an alpha's call. Every Leaken within 10 miles would hear it and know their king demanded obedience. Gareth was already at the door, his massive body tense and ready. Within minutes, Varric heard the thunder of paws on snow. His patrol guards materialized from the woods, 4 wolves moving with supernatural speed, their eyes glowing amber in the failing light. The largest, a gray female named Kira, shifted immediately, her body flowing from wolf to human woman wrapped in a traveling cloak she'd carried in her jaws. "My king." She dropped to one knee, her voice urgent. "Take human form, all of you," Varric commanded. "We transport 2 humans to the citadel immediately. The woman is dying. If she does not survive the journey, none of you will survive the night after." Am I understood? The guards shifted, their faces going pale as they recognized the lethal promise in their Alpha's voice. They had never heard him speak with such raw violence hovering beneath his words. Kira, carry the child. Torvin, bring blankets from the patrol packs, every one we have. Wrap the woman. Carefully. Varric lifted Elena from the cot himself, cradling her against his chest. She weighed nothing, a fragile collection of bones and failing breath. The mate bond pulled at him, demanding he never let her go. The journey back was a blur of speed and desperate focus. His guards ran in formation around him, breaking trail through the deep snow while Kira carried Alara, who clutched her gold and stared back at the only home she'd ever known disappearing into the white distance. The obsidian citadel rose from the mountainside like a black crown, its towers catching the last red light of sunset. Torches blazed along the walls. Warmth. Safety. Healers who could save her. Varric burst through the gates roaring for the physician, carrying his dying mate into the light. The royal healer, an ancient wolf named Matthias who had tended 3 generations of Alphas, took one look at Elena and began barking orders that sent servants scattering in every direction. They carried her to the king's own chambers. Varric would tolerate her nowhere else, and laid her on the massive 4-poster bed draped in furs and silk. A fire roared to life in the hearth. Hot water arrived in silver basins. Vials of medicine clinked as Matthias arranged them on the bedside table with shaking hands. Winter's fever, my king, the old healer confirmed, his voice grim. Advanced stage. Her body is shutting down. He worked as he spoke, spooning liquid between Elena's cracked lips, pressing hot cloths to her frozen extremities, layering blankets over her frail form. The next 12 hours will tell. If the fever breaks, she may survive. If not, she will survive, Varric said, and it was not a request. Matthias met his Alpha's eyes and saw something there that made him bow his head. I will do everything in my power, my king. Alara refused to leave, even when servants tried to coax her away with promises of warm food and soft beds. She planted herself beside her mother's pillow, still wrapped in Varric's fur cloak, her small hand gripping Elena's pale fingers. Varric understood. He would not leave either. He dragged a chair to the opposite side of the bed and sat, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Servants brought him reports he didn't read, food he didn't eat. The castle whispered with confusion. Their king had returned from patrol carrying a dying human woman and her child, had installed them in his private chambers, and now sat vigil like a man possessed. Let them whisper. None of it mattered except the shallow rise and fall of Elena's chest. Night deepened. Alara finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled against her mother's side like a kitten seeking warmth. The fire crackled. Matthias checked Elena's pulse every hour, his expression remaining carefully neutral. Near dawn, when grey light began seeping through the windows, Elena's eyes fluttered open. She stared at the carved ceiling high above, at the tapestries hanging on stone walls, at the fire blazing in a hearth large enough to roast a boar. Her gaze found Alara sleeping beside her, then tracked slowly to Varric sitting in the shadows. Terror flooded her face. Where? Her voice cracked. Where am I? Where is my daughter? Please, I don't. She tried to sit up, gasping at the effort. I can't pay for this. Whatever this is, I can't. Peace, Varric said softly, leaning forward into the firelight. Your daughter is safe. You're both safe. He hesitated, unsure how to explain. You're in my home. And you're not leaving. Elena's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The furs, the tapestries, the sheer impossible luxury of the room, and the man sitting before her, dark-haired and broad-shouldered, wearing leather armor marked with silver insignia she recognized from coins and proclamations. The wolf's head. The crescent moon. You're the king, she whispered, and tried to push herself upright despite Matthias's protests. Your Majesty, forgive me, I didn't know, panic made her clumsy. She gathered Alara into her arms, waking the child. We shouldn't be here. We don't belong in a place like this. You belong where I say you belong, Varric said, more roughly than he intended. He softened his tone at her flinch. Please. You nearly died. You need rest, warmth, food. Stay. Both of you. I can't. Elena's voice broke. Look at me. Look at this room. I'm a seamstress who lives in a cottage with holes in the walls. You're a king. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about why you brought us here, about what you want from. She stopped, holding Elara tighter. We'll leave as soon as I can walk. I won't impose on your kindness any further. The bond writhed in Varric's chest, howling at the thought of her leaving. His wolf demanded he tell her the truth, make her understand. But how? How did he explain that she was his mate, his fated one, when she could barely look at him without fear? There's something you need to know about me, he said slowly. About what I am. He stood and walked to the door, opening it. Gareth. Come. The massive timber wolf padded into the room, his silver-grey fur catching the firelight. Elena tensed but didn't cry out. Elara perked up immediately. The wolf from the village, the child exclaimed. Mummy, he helped us. Varric knelt beside Gareth, resting his hand on the wolf's broad head. This is Gareth. He's not just a wolf. He's a man. My beta. My second in command. He met Elena's eyes. We're lichens. Shapeshifters. And I need to know, does that frighten you? Elena stared at the wolf, then at Varric, processing the impossible information. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand. Gareth moved forward, pressing his massive head into her palm, and she gasped at the intelligence she saw in those golden eyes. Too knowing, too human to belong to an ordinary beast. He's beautiful, she whispered, stroking the soft fur behind his ears. Are all your people like this? Can they all? Yes. Elena looked at Varric with new understanding dawning in her eyes. And you? You're a wolf, Varric confirmed. The largest in my pack. And the loneliest, until 3 days ago when I met a barefoot child selling shoes in the snow. Elena's recovery was slow but steady. The fever broke on the 3rd day, and color began returning to her cheeks. Matthias declared it a miracle, though Varric suspected the mate bond itself had lent her strength, pulling her back from death's threshold whether she understood it or not. She took her meals in the king's chambers, still too weak to walk far, while Varric visited between his duties, bringing her books from the library and sitting by the fire to talk. They spoke of small things at first, her work as a seamstress, his frustrations with council meetings, Elara's boundless energy. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Elena told him about her husband who had died in a logging accident 2 years past, leaving her alone with a child and debts she could never repay. Varric confessed his loneliness, the weight of ruling a kingdom for centuries while watching everyone he cared for grow old and die. He did not yet speak of the mate bond. That truth could wait until she was stronger, until she looked at him without that shadow of uncertainty in her eyes. Elara, meanwhile, had no such reservations. She claimed the castle as her personal kingdom, dubbing it the Big Stone House, and charming every servant and guard she encountered. She befriended the kitchen staff, who sneaked her honey cakes. She convinced Gareth to let her ride on his back in wolf form, giggling as he padded through the corridors. She sat in on Varric's morning reports, asking solemn questions about grain stores and border patrols that made his advisors hide smiles. But not everyone was charmed. The whispers began in the 2nd week. Human stray. Charity case. The king's new pet. Varric heard the words echoing through stone corridors, saw the sideways glances his courtiers gave Elena when she finally grew strong enough to walk the castle halls. Some were merely curious. Others were cruel. The worst was Elder Kale, who cornered Varric outside the council chamber with ice in his voice. The pack is talking, my king. A human woman and her child living in your private chambers? You must see how this appears. The bloodline must remain pure. If you need companionship, there are suitable she-wolves who would. Enough. Varric's voice dropped to a growl that made Kale step back. Elena and Elara are under my protection. Anyone who troubles them answers to me. Personally. Am I clear? Kale's jaw tightened. Perfectly clear, my king. Though I wonder, how long can you protect them from the entire court? The summons came on a grey morning 3 weeks after Elena and Elara had arrived at the citadel. The High Council demanded an audience with their king, and Varric knew exactly what they would say before he ever entered the great hall. They were waiting for him, 12 elders seated in a semicircle, their faces carved from stone and disapproval. Kale stood at their center, his silver hair pulled back severe and sharp, his eyes cold with righteous certainty. "My king," Kale began without preamble, "the council has discussed the matter of your guests. We believe it is time they returned to their village. You have been more than generous. You saved the woman's life, provided for the child. Your charity has been noted and admired. But they have overstayed what is appropriate." "Appropriate," Varric repeated softly, taking his seat on the throne carved from black stone. "Tell me, Kale, what exactly is inappropriate about offering shelter to my people?" "They are not pack," another elder interjected, a stern woman named Mara. "The human woman grows stronger each day, yet she remains in the king's chambers. The child runs wild through our halls. The servants gossip. The younger wolves ask questions we cannot answer." "What questions?" Varric kept his voice level, though his wolf snarled beneath his skin. Kale leaned forward. "They ask if you intend to make her your queen." Silence fell across the hall, heavy as snowfall. Varric saw the trap being laid. If he denied it, they would demand Elena's immediate removal. If he confirmed it, they would argue he had lost his mind. "The Leakin bloodline has remained pure for 1,000 years, Kale continued, his voice rising with passion. "We are stronger, faster, longer-lived than humans because we do not dilute our blood with theirs. A human queen cannot lead our pack. She cannot bear strong heirs. She will grow old and die while you remain young, leaving you broken and the kingdom without stability. My king, I beg you, see reason. There are suitable she-wolves who would." "Name one," Varric interrupted. Kale blinked. "I'm sorry." "Name one she-wolf in this kingdom who would be suitable as my queen. One who I have shown even the slightest interest in across 3 centuries of rule." Varric stood, descending the steps from his throne. "You cannot, because there has never been one. Not until Elena. She is human." Mara's voice cracked like a whip. "She is mine," Varric said quietly, and the Alpha command rippled through his words, making every elder flinch. "And I will hear no more discussion of sending her away." The summons came on a grey morning 3 weeks after Elena and Alara had arrived at the citadel. The High Council demanded an audience with their king, and Varric knew exactly what they would say before he ever entered the great hall. They were waiting for him, 12 elders seated in a semicircle, their faces carved from stone and disapproval. Kale stood at their center, his silver hair pulled back severe and sharp, his eyes cold with righteous certainty. "My king," Kale began without preamble, "the council has discussed the matter of your guests. We believe it is time they returned to their village. You have been more than generous. You saved the woman's life, provided for the child. Your charity has been noted and admired. But they have overstayed what is appropriate." "Appropriate," Varric repeated softly, taking his seat on the throne carved from black stone. "Tell me, Kale, what exactly is inappropriate about offering shelter to my people?" "They are not pack," another elder interjected, a stern woman named Mara. "The human woman grows stronger each day, yet she remains in the king's chambers. The child runs wild through our halls. The servants gossip. The younger wolves ask questions we cannot answer." "What questions?" Varric kept his voice level, though his wolf snarled beneath his skin. Kale leaned forward. "They ask if you intend to make her your queen." Silence fell across the hall, heavy as snowfall. Varric saw the trap being laid. If he denied it, they would demand Elena's immediate removal. If he confirmed it, they would argue he had lost his mind. "The Leakin bloodline has remained pure for 1,000 years, Kale continued, his voice rising with passion. "We are stronger, faster, longer-lived than humans because we do not dilute our blood with theirs. A human queen cannot lead our pack. She cannot bear strong heirs. She will grow old and die while you remain young, leaving you broken and the kingdom without stability. My king, I beg you, see reason. There are suitable she-wolves who would." "Name one," Varric interrupted. Kale blinked. "I'm sorry." Name one she-wolf in this kingdom who would be suitable as my queen. One who I have shown even the slightest interest in across 3 centuries of rule." Varric stood, descending the steps from his throne. "You cannot, because there has never been one. Not until Elena. She is human." Mara's voice cracked like a whip. "She is mine," Varric said quietly, and the Alpha command rippled through his words, making every elder flinch. "And I will hear no more discussion of sending her away." The wedding took place in the courtyard at Winter's Heart, reclaiming the snow that had nearly claimed Elena's life. She wore white fur and silver, a crown of ice crystals woven through her dark hair. Varric stood before her in ceremonial armor, the entire pack assembled as witnesses. When he spoke the ancient vows and bit gently into her palm, marking her as his mate before gods and wolves alike, the bond that had hummed between them for months blazed into complete, unbreakable wholeness. Elara stood beside them in a dress of deep blue, bouncing with barely contained excitement. When Matthias placed the adoption circlet on her head, a delicate band marking her as Princess of the Northern Territories, she threw her arms around Varric's neck and whispered, "Does this mean you're my papa now?" "Yes," Varric said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you'll have me." "Forever and ever," she promised. Kale and 2 other elders who had opposed the union were absent, having chosen exile over bending knee to a human queen. The rest of the council had witnessed Elena's courage in the throne room and decided that perhaps strength came in forms other than claws and fangs. 5 years passed like a dream. The kingdom prospered under Elena's quiet influence. She established trade routes, opened the castle to the poor, taught Varric that ruling meant more than protecting, it meant listening. Elara grew tall and confident, training with the guard, learning statecraft, beloved by wolves and humans alike. On the morning of Elara's 12th birthday, Varric found her standing before a glass case in the throne room, studying its contents with thoughtful eyes. "Do you remember these?" he asked, joining her. "My old shoes," Elara said softly, looking at the worn brown leather preserved behind crystal. "The ones I tried to sell you. The ones you did sell me." Varric placed his hand on her shoulder. "For a bag of gold and a kingdom. I was so scared that day." Elara leaned against him. "I thought Mummy would die. I thought I'd be alone." "You were willing to freeze to death to save her. That's what love is, Elara. Not grand gestures or pretty words. It's standing barefoot in the snow, offering everything you have, knowing it might not be enough but trying anyway." Elara looked up at her father, at the king who had knelt in the ice for a desperate child, and smiled. "You taught me that," she said. "The moment you bought my shoes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please subscribe to the channel for more werewolf romance tales, alpha kings, rejected mates, and powerful Omega stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment below telling me what you thought of this story and what kind of werewolf stories you'd like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Thank you for reading, and I'll see you in the next. Your hopeless romantic, Amora.